Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and I love Stephen King. Why am I starting the video off this way? Because this is going to be my updated Stephen King book collection. The last video that I did was in 2020 and I have acquired several more books since then. So I figured this would be a good chance to update that video. It is a very popular video of mine, which I totally get. Stephen King's awesome and he's got a lot of books. So yeah, I figured I'd make an updated video, talk about my Stephen King collection. I'm a constant reader and it is just so much fun. I've been trying to thrift every single book except for like his new releases that have been coming out. So that's been fun. It's always like such a scavenger hunt, trying to hunt down some of the really cool covers from, you know, the 70s and 80s. So yes, that is the introduction. I'm gonna go ahead and take you to my shelves over there and talk about my Stephen King book collection. First book in the collection, we have Carrie. This was one of the very first Stephen King books that I read. I'd also recommend it as a good starting point to Stephen King because it is smaller than a lot of his other books. But I really enjoyed Carrie. I enjoy the story a little bit more than the cover, but you know, good start to the collection. Next up, we have one of my favorite Stephen King books. This is in my top 5, Salem's Lot. This is about a town infested by vampires. Honestly, I love the cover. I do like the simplicity of it. Do I think maybe a little bit more could have been done with it? Potentially. But, you know, cover is cool and the story is just absolutely wonderful. Next up we have The Shining, very infamous story. I feel like even if you're not like a Stephen King fan, you know about this story. The cover I'm not wild about. I do actually like the naked hardback of this. It is this beautiful vintagey green color, but the people are give or take. I do like the animals and the overlook itself in the background, but I do really like the story and it is a pretty cool cover and probably, like, this is weird, but like my favorite naked hardback because this color green is just to die for. Next up we have the Bachman books. This has Rage, Long Walk, Roadwork, and The Running Man. This is a very boring cover to me, just because it is just font, but it is like a very iconic font for like the Bachman books and Stephen King. I feel like when I see this font, I immediately think Stephen King. And The Long Walk, without a doubt, is my favorite from this collection. So it is a pretty good collection. So for such an infamous story collection, this has kind of a boring cover to me. But I am glad that I have it in my collection because Rage is out of print. Next up, we have The Stand, which has seen better days. I have to be very gentle with this one. This is the edition before the uncut edition, so it doesn't have all the extra content in it. Honestly, for covers, 10 out of 10 for cover. The story, unpopular opinion, I don't really care for The Stand, but the cover is super cool. I love the cover. Just the story, unfortunately, not my cup of tea. And I know that's wildly unpopular. I'm sorry, I just didn't like it. I wanted to. Next up is The Dead Zone, which is actually another one of my favorite Stephen King stories. So this one's like a 10 out of 10 for story. The cover, I'm not wild about. I do like the greenish yellow font. I'm just a sucker for that color, I suppose. I don't like the man's face. I don't like the real people on covers trend. Never have, never will. So the cover is not the greatest, but the story is absolutely wonderful. So that is The Dead Zone. Next up is Firestarter, which I feel like maybe I'm gonna contradict with what I just said about The Dead Zone, because I do love this cover. I know there's a person's face on it, but it's more stylized. It's got the fire. That's like the main kind of thing that draws you to. You can see the eyes, you see the fire, you look closer, you see that there's a face. I do like Firestarter. It is a good book. I do enjoy the reading of Firestarter. And I do really like this cover. This is one of the newer books to my collection. Obviously not newer as in when it came out, but newer as when I got it. But yeah, I do really like the simplicity of this one, and you know, this kind of does break my rule. I don't like people on the cover, but like illustrated way better than like the fake photos. Next up we have Cujo, a very infamous book to me in my own personal lore, because when I was having really bad insomnia a couple of years ago, I started and finished this in a single night. This one, I enjoy it, but I don't enjoy it. This story makes me really sad. I'm a dog lover, so if you know, you know. I do like the cover though. Again, very simplistic, tells you exactly what you're gonna get with the cover. Yeah, highly enjoy. Next up is Christine, a surprise to me last year. This was one of my favorite books of last year, and I am not a car person, so I did really love this. This is one of my favorite Stephen King stories, 10 out of 10 story. Also 10 out of 10 for the cover. Again, if this had like a car on the cover, I wouldn't like it as much, but I do like the car almost like decals and the skull and everything. Like the font typography going on here, really cool, really simplistic, love it. Next up is another infamous one. This is another book where I would suggest, if you've never read a Stephen King, to start with this one, because I think it's one of his most genuinely terrifying stories. It's one of his best written stories, best ended stories, and the cover, wow, this is probably my favorite Stephen King cover that I own. So yes, it's not like in my top 5 favorite Stephen Kings. It's probably in my top 10, but I absolutely love this cover. I love the cat. I love, if you look further, you can actually see the pet cemetery and our main characters getting a hint of what's to come in the novel. Yeah, this is, I think, one of my favorite Stephen King book covers that I have in the collection. And I really enjoyed this story as well, but yeah, definitely one of my favorite covers. Next up, we have Different Seasons, which is a short story collection with 4 short stories. I say that loosely because, again, this is a huge book. So, you know, a Stephen King short story, not really a short story, but I do like the cover. The cover's really cool. I like how, you know, the different seasons are represented. This one is a very up and down collection for me. I know a lot of people suggest this as a good starting point for like a short story collection. This does have Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, also The Body. So those are 2 very famous Stephen King works. However, my favorite in here was Apt Pupil. So just, it's a very up and down short story collection for me, but the cover is super cool. Next up, we have The Eyes of the Dragon. I was very mediocre about this story. I'm not a huge fan of it. I do think it's cool to see where he kind of takes some of these ideas with like the Dark Tower series and other like fantasy-centric tales. I do love the cover. I do love the illustrations throughout. I love horror. I love fantasy. Those are my top 2 genres. So very cool cover. I am a sucker for a dragon on the cover of a book. Just I didn't like the actual story of this one. And then next up we have one of my favorite books, not just from Stephen King, but of all time, It. This one, obviously not the original cover. I am still hunting it down, but this one is my copy that I annotated. So I wanted to annotate this because this is one of my favorite books. I did not want to get a vintage one and annotate it, so I went ahead and got this copy, annotated it. I absolutely love it. I love the movies. I love all the adaptations, and I love this story. And this, honestly, for like a recover, is okay. Some of the recovers I do not like. This is decent. It's fine for what I need it to do for my collection, but I am excited to get my hands on the original cover one day. Next up, we have The Tommyknockers, which surprisingly a story I did end up really enjoying despite not knowing a lot about it. And the cover, honestly, I would take the eyes out up here if I were designing it. Obviously I'm not, but I do like it. It's fun, it's cool, it's kitschy. I don't know, not much to say about The Tommyknockers. It was a good book, and the cover's kind of cool, and other than that, yeah, just like a very middle-of-the-road Stephen King book, but I feel like this one doesn't get talked about a lot, and I did enjoy it. Next up is The Dark Half. I enjoyed this book. I think this cover is so frightfully boring. We see like a change of the typography a little bit here. I'm not sure if this is the original cover or not, but the actual story, I think this is a skull. Like if you look on this side, I think it's supposed to be a skull. But you can't really tell. It's very like blown in, and it just makes it look like just a black cover with nothing on it. So kind of boring execution here, but I did enjoy this story. Before Past Midnight has a pretty cool cover, maybe, I don't know. It's a short story collection that I have not read. I think this is the first one on this shelf that I have not read. So yeah, it's a cover. This looks kind of computer generated instead of like illustrative, which I prefer illustrative, but yeah, not a lot to say about it. Next up is Needful Things, quote unquote, the last Castle Rock story. I'm pretty sure that's a lie. Yeah, I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that is a lie. That is not the last Castle Rock story. I could be wrong though, feel free to correct me. I have read this. The cover's cool. I think the cover does a good job of kind of setting up the story. I like how it's back to more of an illustrative cover, and I really enjoyed this like monkey's paw sort of story. If you've heard of that kind of lore, this is following up on that, and very fascinating. So yeah, I do like this cover. I think it's like a very Stephen King cover. Like if you think of like Stephen King books, I feel like this is a very like cover that you would think of if you think of Stephen King. But yeah, next up is Gerald's Game. I actually am in the middle of reading this one right now, so wow, okay, just as I'm filming this, I noticed that the bedpost right here is a woman crouched up into a ball. So actually my opinions of this cover have changed for the better. I actually think that's like a really cool touch. If you know what Gerald's Game is about, I think this is a really apt cover. Yeah, that's a really cool little detail right there. I don't know if you can tell, but it is, I thought it was just a, you know, knob on a bedpost, but it's actually a woman. So wow, okay, that's really cool. So I'm excited to finish this one, and it's a pretty neat cover. Next up is Dolores Claiborne. I really love this one. I really love the audiobook of this one. I think it adds a lot. I love Dolores as a character. I love this cover. I also love in the book, you have this eclipse detail on the top of the pages there, so I think that's really cool as well. Dolores Claiborne was one. I feel like with some Stephen Kings, they're such popular books, they're such in like the common lexicon, like a lot of people know what Cujo's about, for example, or what The Shining's about. I didn't know what Dolores Claiborne was about, and once I found out, I wasn't sure if I'd like this one, and then I read it and really fell in love. So yeah, I had a really fun time reading this one. Audiobook's wonderful. And I just, yeah, the cover and the details in this one are really cool. Okay, and now we are moving on to the next shelf in my collection. Starting off with Nightmares and Dreamscapes. This is another one I have not read. I love the cover. Scarecrows are so creepy to me, and I feel like the nightmares and then the scarecrow, that works really well together. It also has like a Castle Rock t-shirt. That's another cool little detail. I love finding those little details on the cover. I do love this cover. Can't tell you anything about the contents because again, I have not read it yet. Next up is Insomnia, which I actually thought was better than I know a lot of other people think. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people tend to say. I really like the Easter eggs in this one. I think it's like a well done story. That being said, I think this cover is so boring. I don't think it gives off any of what the story is about. I think it could have had a really cool cover just based on what the subject matter was about, and I think they really missed the mark with just how plain and boring this cover is. Next up we have Rose Madder. I'm not wild about the cover. I'm not wild about anything that's happening here. The typography is just like sloppy to me. I understand what the cover means after having read this story, but it's not like a cover that jumps out at you and makes you want to pick it up, at least not in my opinion. I do love this story though. This is actually my very first Stephen King book that I read, so it does have a special place in my heart, just the cover's not really doing it for me. The next two I feel like I do have to talk about together. Just because, look, they make one picture together. Richard Bachman's The Regulators, which obviously Stephen King's pen name, and then Stephen King's Desperation. I have not read either of these, so I do think it's super cool how the covers combine. I'm interested. I have no idea what it's about, but the covers, honestly, really cool. I love wolves, so I love that that's featured prominently. There's like a scary doll, there are crows. There's a lot going on with these two covers. So I will say I'll give it like a 10 out of 10 for covers, or like a 9 out of 10, because they definitely make me want to pick these books up. And I just think it is so cool how they combine together to make one solid picture. Next up is Hearts in Atlantis. This is another short story collection that I have not read, and I think the cover, quite frankly, is kind of boring. That cat gives me weird vibes. I know I said Pet Sematary was like my favorite cover. I don't like the cat. It looks like a little too humanish. This era of Stephen King covers, I don't like the font. I think this is like late 90s, early 2000s, which makes sense because it's not like my favorite sort of, a lot of design choices in that era, not my favorites. So I guess it makes sense that the books are not my cup of tea as well, just in terms of covers. But yeah, I haven't read this one. Next up is Bag of Bones. I have not read this. And I don't really love the cover. I feel like I should, just because there's like a ghost, maybe, I'm not really sure, a cabin, woods. I feel like I should. It's just there's a lot of white. I don't like mostly white covers. I don't know. I just don't really like this cover, but I am intrigued to read the book because I've heard lots of good things about it. Okay, next up is Dreamcatcher. I love this cover. I think it's very like kitschy and fun. I like the purples and blues. I love foxes, so the fact that there's a little fox down here, so cute. So I do like the cover. Did not like the story whatsoever, but the cover's cool, so at least, you know, there's a win on one of those. From a Buick 8, I have not read, and honestly, this cover doesn't make me interested in picking it up. I'm really glad Christine's cover didn't go this way because I'm not a car person. This doesn't intrigue me. I will read it someday, but it's not one that I think is particularly impressive. I think this whole kind of era of Stephen King, the covers are just meh to me. Next up is Everything's Eventual 14 Dark Tales. I did think this was a very solid short story collection. Cover is boring. I guess the spine is kind of cool because it's got like, oh God, please help us. Like you see that maybe something's not right with this very picturesque sort of plate setup. I just think it's boring, but the stories inside, most of them are quite excellent. So Cell, I enjoyed this. This was okay. This was Stephen King's take on zombies, and also like technology. Again, I think, I don't know, were we trying to just, we're like computers just starting to get big, so we were just making everything digital? I don't know. Something is off to me about all these covers. They're just ugly. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry if you've loved any of these, by the way. We could definitely have different opinions. Yeah, Cell was okay. The cover, it's just boring. Lisi's Story, I have not read. The cover is pretty cool because while this, you know, is very plain, if you, let me try and do this without ripping anything, lift up the cover, the naked hardback, it's just so cool. I actually tried to read this last year and DNF'd it. I'm nervous I'm not going to like it too much, but I will try and read it again sometime eventually. But the cover, at least not the dust jacket, but the actual cover is very beautiful. Juma Key, I have not read. The cover does get points for having holographic letters, and even though it still has like kind of a boring cover, it is so much better than the last couple we've talked about. So yeah, we're getting out of that very boring white cover phase, and I do like the waves and the storm up there. It's not the best cover, it's not the worst either. Clearly you can see like the first shelf, I've read almost all of them, and then this one I've not read almost any of them. I haven't read the short story collection, Just After Sunset. The cover's fine. It's a little boring. It does have like a holographic sort of, I don't know if that'll pick up on camera or not, like if you tilt it. So that's cool. But again, I don't know, it's just kind of boring. I don't really know what I love in colors. I love an illustrative cover. I don't know, the first shelf was doing more things for cover design than this one for me, but I haven't read this, so I don't know, maybe this is like the perfect cover for this story collection. Under the Dome is a story I did like. I think actually this would be better suited to a cover like Salem's Lot. I don't like how it looks like a stock image of a town, but I did like this story. The cover is boring, but you know, don't judge a book by its cover. I know that's not like the most important thing here, but yeah. Boring cover, but we are moving out of the boring cover era, I believe. And then last on this shelf, we have 11/22/63. I do like this cover. It works for me. It's just very simplistic, how it has the newspaper kind of really just explaining what the story is gonna be about. I also really like how on the back it shows an alternate history. So that is, it really gives what this book is going to be about. And I did really like the book. So cover design, it is entirely too hot in Arkansas because the amount of times my camera is overheated while filming this. Anyway, I enjoy this cover. I don't know where I was when my camera died on me, but yeah, I like it. I liked the story a lot as well. Next up, we have my last full shelf of Stephen King books. First up on this shelf, we have Dr. Sleep, the sequel to The Shining. I'm not wild about this cover because it does have like a real person's face on it. However, the font, really cool. I like how it's smoke. It makes a lot of sense when you've read the novel. It is very simplistic, and I really love this book. I love the movie adaptation too. I don't know how much of an unpopular opinion that is, but yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next up, I know I only have 2 out of 3 of this series. That's just what happens when you buy books secondhand. Okay, this is my most unpopular opinion, I'm sure, or maybe it's that I don't like The Stand. But Stephen King's Mr. Mercedes, I didn't like Mr. Mercedes at all. The cover, again, we're back to the white. I just think white covers, especially when you just like Photoshop an umbrella, boring to me. I do like, I don't know, like I even like that better on the back. Anyway, the cover is cooler than the book. This is probably my very least favorite book of Stephen King's. I'm sorry. And yeah, I haven't read Finders Keepers yet because I didn't like Mr. Mercedes. The cover's slightly better. I do like the bloodstained book. That's fun. I don't know. But still not my favorite. I don't like the Photoshoppy, white, boring books. So yeah. I don't know when I'll get around to this one, seeing as how I didn't like Mr. Mercedes. Next up, we have Revival. Kind of boring cover, but it's boring in a different way, I feel like, than Mr. Mercedes, or like Hearts in Atlantis. It is reflective, which is going to be hard to show on camera. I did enjoy this one. This was a pretty decent Stephen King book, and the cover does fit the tone of the book. So yeah, reflective is cool. It is kind of boring though. This was my very first Stephen King book that I bought brand new. I actually went to Barnes & Noble and bought it, and this is when I was getting back into reading again. So that's kind of fun. I do like the cover. I do think, I don't know, it's just, I don't know if I like the cover because of nostalgic reasons, because again, I do think this is like stock photo kind of quality. This isn't a novel. This feels like a cash grab to me. It is so tiny. It should not have been the price of a regular hardback book. It was fine for what it was, but it absolutely should have been put in a short story collection. So next up we have what I feel like is the current phase of Stephen King, just in terms of typography and like branding. Sorry, that was one of my dogs. Outsider. I loved this book. It really worked for me. I know it didn't work for a lot of people. I like how it is matte and textured. You can't see it, but I can feel it, and I like it. And the cover is simplistic and cool. I like the abstractness of it, and it's not my favorite cover by any means, but compared to what we had been dealing with, it's a step in the right direction. I love the texture on the cover, and yeah, we're moving in the right direction. Next up, we have The Institute. I really loved this one. I actually have a whole reading vlog about it. The cover is kind of boring, but I will forgive it because I think the cover really works. I feel like it ties in together all parts of the storyline really beautifully. How we have, I don't want to give too much away about The Institute, but I did really like The Institute. The cover, I like it more having read the story, if that makes sense. I think it really showcases what's in the story, and I do like this like sunburst kind of in the background effect. I think that's really cool. And again, the matte covers, love. Next is If It Bleeds. This is a short story collection. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised it's getting so many adaptations because the short stories were good, but not like my favorite short stories, if that makes sense. The cover, I wasn't a fan. Well, I was mediocre on it when I ordered it. And then when I actually got it, I did realize that this cat's nose is a rat, and that makes more sense. It's not just a funky looking cat. So it gets more points for that. I think the spine actually is very nice and simplistic. And again, just the matte, I do like how it looks like it's gold or like metallic, but it's not like super duper shiny. So yeah, kind of boring cover. I do like that hidden detail. That is something I like about covers. But yeah, I don't know. It's just an average short story collection. Okay, maybe another unpopular opinion here. I have actually DNF'd Billy Summers. I got like 40% of the way through it, and it just got kind of triggering for me, so I do plan on returning to it later. I do like the cover, especially after reading it. I think how it's ripped in the middle, and we have like a novelization there, and then we have like the car in the forest. I do think that's really cool. I like the cover design on this one. I just wished that I liked the contents more, or that, you know, I feel like when I return to this, hopefully I will like it a little bit more. And the latest Stephen King book as of this filming is Fairy Tale. I love this one. I love the cover. I love the story. I love just the simplicity of the going down into a circular set of stairs. I didn't know what this cover was about until I really stared at it and looked at it, and then I fell in love. I love the dog. I love a good dog on a cover, and what a good girl that dog is. So yeah, I enjoy it. I'm not the wildest fan of the font of Fairy Tale here, but we're gonna forgive that because this book was a delight, and the cover itself, very cool. Speaking of cool covers, I do have all the Dark Tower series together because I like keeping series together. I know chronologically it doesn't make sense, but it does to my mind. So I have read the first 4 in this series. I love these. I love this cover. I love it. It's just the color illustrations in the book as well. I absolutely love. I didn't think The Gunslinger was the strongest start to a series, but the cover's rad. The drawing of the 3, better book than The Gunslinger. Cover's not as cool. It is just a little on the simplistic side, but we're gonna give it a pass because there are color illustrations in this actual book itself which make up for it. The Wastelands has a better cover in my opinion. I don't really get it. Like why this specific one has this specific cover. I guess if you look at the, wow, I'm making so many connections. That's supposed to be a rose, right? Is that a rose? And it's also like a galaxy. Okay, yeah, this cover's cool, and now I get a little bit more why this cover is the way it is. Yeah. Next up, Wizard and Glass, good book, cover. Moving into the boring territory, I'm gonna be honest. I wish, take this right here, blow it up, get rid of this red stuff. It would have been a better cover, you know? Wolves of Kala, I have not read yet, but the cover, very cool, very intriguing, especially now that I kind of know who is on the cover, I feel like, of this one. I like the font. It gives me Indiana Jones vibes, like the Wolves of the Kala part. Yeah, I love the illustrated cover. I think it is very cool. Yeah, so notice how my like Dark Tower series, very eclectic in terms of like what editions that I've bought. Song of Susanna, it's fine. It's a boring cover. It's not as cool as Wolves of the Kala, but it's fine. Next up, we have The Dark Tower, and I haven't finished the series, but just thematically, I think this cover is not only beautiful, but it really just wraps up the series and encompasses the series as a whole. I am excited to finish this series someday. Again, I've read the first 4 books in the series. I've just yet to finish it. Next up is Later. Meh. I like the vintage cover. I like the vintage illustrated cover. The hard case crime books, Joyland in particular, have some pretty cool covers. I was mediocre on this one. I did like the paranormal aspects and how it wasn't just crime, because I've tended to notice I'm not the biggest fan of Stephen King books that aren't paranormal and are just crime stories. Next up is Secret Windows. This is like an essay collection and some short fiction, like also like stuff on the craft of writing. So it's a pretty interesting read. I think the cover is kind of boring, and it doesn't really do a lot. It is illustrated, which I do like. Yeah, this is actually like a pretty cool book in my collection because it does have like a lot of essays by Stephen King, even like some short fiction that he had written as a kid. So it is a fun read, and it's a fun little book to have in my collection. Next up, we have Gwendy's Button Box by Stephen King and Richard Chismar. And I know this is a series. I've read this one. It was okay. It wasn't like my favorite thing in the world, and I honestly thought it was fine as a standalone. The cover's okay too. Not my favorite, not my least favorite. Just kind of like the book Gwendy's Button Box itself. It just kind of sits somewhere in the middle. And like I said, that is my last full shelf. I do have just a couple of paperbacks that I just have with some other vintage paperbacks because I think they're cool. The Dark Half, I actually think this is a cooler cover than the hardback with the little birds, and it makes more sense thematically. So I do think this is a cool edition. And then I also have Dance Macabre, which is, I'm not sure actually. I think it's nonfiction, but Stephen King himself is on the cover, which is very funny. I'll bring you in for a closer look. It's just very entertaining to me. I do want to pick this up soon because there's just really nothing like reading a good used vintage paperback. It's just such a fun reading experience. So yeah, that is the last book in the collection. And that is going to be the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know your favorite Stephen King book that you've ever read, or if you haven't read any Stephen King, you know, maybe what book you might want to read, or if you don't want to read any, that is fine too. But yeah, subscribe to my channel for all of the cozy gaming and bookish content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I will see y'all in the next video. Bye!